eyes and your vision are under attack. Damaging blue light from the sun, your phone, your computer, your tablet, even light bulbs and car headlights is constantly bombarding you. The good news is our eyes actually already have a line of defense to counter the effects of blue light. This defense is made up of 3 pigments called carotenoids. MacuHealth with Micromicelle, the only supplement with the exclusive patent on all 3 macular carotenoids and Micromicelle technology.
Do your patients know what presbyopia is?
There are people who are afraid of the press.
Have you talked to your patients about multifocal contact lenses?
I've heard the bifocal, but not multifocal.
Exactly, not multifocal.
Do you need help with your multifocal strategy? Learn more at the conclusion of this episode. With more screen usage and indoor time, myopia, also known as nearsightedness, is increasing and getting worse in children. Now, certified eye doctors can prescribe MySight One Day, the first and only FDA-approved soft contact lens to slow myopia progression in age-appropriate children. Visit CooperVision.com to find a Brilliant Futures certified eye doctor near you. Good morning, I'm Dr. Kerry Gelb, and welcome to Wellness 1280 on Open Your Eyes Radio. Please listen as I discuss the newest information in the world of health, nutrition, and sports every Saturday morning, 6 a.m. Central Time on AM 1280 The Patriot. Also, please share your thoughts by emailing me at drkerrygelb@gmail.com. That's drkerry@gmail.com. And visit my new website, wellness1280.com, where we have all guest links, Wellness 1280 info, and previous shows. Wellness is taking over the Patriot Airways for the next hour. So sit back and enjoy my interview with return guest, former NHL hockey player and Olympic hero, Erik Westrum. Today, we're joined once again by someone who knows what it takes to push the limits on the ice and in life. In his first book, Becoming Elite, Erik Westrum gave us an inside look at the mindset and discipline it takes to compete at the highest levels, on and off the rink. Now, in his powerful new book, The 1% Impact, How to Transform Your Life in 15 Minutes a Day, Erik reveals the secret weapon of the ultra-successful, how small, intentional daily habits can create massive, lasting change. Erik spent 12 years as a professional hockey player. He has an MBA. He's a leadership coach, motivational speaker, and entrepreneur. And now he's showing us that becoming elite isn't just for athletes. The question is, could 15 minutes a day actually change your life? So stick around. You may be surprised by the answer. Erik, thank you for joining me again today on Open Your Eyes Radio and Podcast with Dr. Kerry Gelb.
Hey, Kerry, appreciate you having me again. Always enjoy our conversations.
I really appreciate it, Erik. So let me ask you, you wrote the first book. What made you write 1% Impact?
So as I was speaking and coaching a lot of different people, whether it was athletes, executives, teams, organizations, sales, marketing, the list goes on. I started to dig a little deeper into not only becoming elite, but it actually transformed my life as I would start to kind of expand my reach. And I started to think about, the 1% impact. And it was actually brought up in a Bible study as I dug deeper into the Bible about 10 years ago. A friend of mine said, "Hey, Erik, why don't you try to read 1% a day, which is 15 minutes." So I started to do it, and it was hard to do 5 minutes, 7, 10, 15. Now, I can sit and read the Bible for 2 hours, but early on, that was kind of the transformation. And then I started to applying it to the 4 pillars of, I don't have to go run a half marathon. I can go for a walk and it's still exercise. I can expand my mindset, 1% a day, and then it's going to build on that. So running is a perfect example. To run a marathon, right? You're going to run small increments, small intervals to get to that point. So for me, as an elite athlete and just an elite mindset, I'm always thinking grandiose. And when you focus on that outcome and not the process, that's when you get in trouble. So a lot of people in the world, think you have to go above and beyond right away, but to start with small, simple steps. And I started to talk about it, over the last 2 years and started to document and write about it. And that was kind of how the birth of the 1% impact came about.
Small, simple steps. It seems so easy and common sense, but I think people try to do too much at one time. They take on a goal and they try to get it all done in one day and they spend hours and hours and then they wind up doing nothing, like changing their diet is a good example. So the 15 minutes, that whole concept, how long did it take you to use that 15 minutes before you started to see a change in yourself? And what kind of example can you give what's happened with yourself or some others that you've actually counseled on the 15 minutes?
Yeah, I think, and the big part is too, it's not like the magic pill, right? It's not like, hey, 15 minutes and you're going to get a six pack, or 15 minutes and you're going to lose 15 pounds, right? I think the biggest part, and the reason I use that 1%, that 15 minutes, it's very easy. So an example is, a client I was working with, and say I was working with you, Carrie, I'd say, hey, Carrie, for the next year, can you put 96 hours to do this? And most people are going to say, Eric, I don't even have 96 minutes, let alone half the time 96 seconds. But if I said, hey, can you do this for 15 minutes? 15 minutes. So whether it's on the physical side, the spiritual side, the emotional, or the psychological side, how can you do that? So perfect example is that client in the business sense was trying to accomplish something on the monetary side of impacting more lives. And we took 15 minutes extra, whether it was in the morning, afternoon, or night, where it was either follow up, it was calls, it was preparation. And that totally changed his business, and he increased it by six figures, which was pretty dramatic. And the reason I use the income side a lot of times is because that's what resonates with people easy. You can see the return on your investment, whereas in time, sometimes you can't go to a leadership conference for 8 hours and now you're a leader. You can't go to the gym for 6 hours today and all of a sudden you're in shape, right? So those are harder to track. But I think a lot of times when you start with that 15 minutes, so similar to me, whether it was reading the Bible or is during certain exercise, for me, after 10, 15, 20 days, you can see it pretty quickly, but the magic happens when you take it from 15 to 30 minutes, to 45 minutes, to an hour and 15. And that's what the hope is when I work with people, is the 15 minutes is kind of that magic pill of like, hey, start here, but you're going to start to see the momentum in any of those aspects that you talked about, whether it's fitness, whether it's discipline, emotional, spiritual, whether it's work, trying to get a better ROI from your employees or from what you're doing from your personal self.
Talk about the difference or the process versus the results. Because I think, especially I have a 15-year-old who plays baseball, and I see that the kids, they focus so much on the results and their statistics, but they don't think about the process. Talk to us about that from as a professional athlete.
Well, it's right here, and I don't think we're on the Zoom call, but I'm showing a phone, right? The phone is instant gratification. So these kids, even athletes, people see this instant gratification, 30, 45 seconds. Oh, that's success. But they don't see the work. So for me, that's how I had success. I necessarily didn't fall in love with the championships, the scoring titles, the medals, all the honors. Like that's a byproduct. I fell in love with the process. So when you fall in love with the process, that's when you're going to have the most success. If you talk to any elite athlete, they're going to say, I fell in love with the process. Similar to me right now, like I work out every morning. I got a cold plunge. I got everything in my basement that I utilize. And my wife is like, hey, you don't play professional hockey anymore. Why are you doing box jumps and sprints and, barbell snatches and everything else? And I look at her and I say, it's because I love the process. And when you take that process and you put it together, the result is almost guaranteed to happen. And a lot of times, what people are looking for that guaranteed result. So then I back up and I say, yes, but you also have to fail, embrace discipline to have success. I was listening to something this morning talking about the lack of failure in our society as parents and as employers or employees. We want the in Minnesota, we were talking about snow. We want it a clear path where our kids or other people, you don't have to overcome an obstacle. Instead, you have to fail to be able to learn. And then that's when you fall in love more with the process because you see the changes as you go through the process instead of just focusing on that outcome. So I'm a huge believer, like you have to fail and then you can embrace discipline and then you can have success.
And we're talking about coaching and coaching that yells at the kids constantly when they not make a mental mistake, but when they're making physical mistakes during the process, during practice. I want to know from somebody who coaches, as a coach that played professional sports, coach kids, works with entrepreneurs, trying to help their business better. Is that an effective way of getting people to do better in the process?
I mean, I think if you look back at, history and coaching, a lot of it was fear-based. What a lot of it was that of fear of failure and just digging into a player. My perspective is whether it's, from when I played to even now, the way that I coach or that I've been taught, from my dad and other, mentors. A mentor of ours, Dick Emmaheiser, used to always go up to kids and just say, wow. He'd be like, wow, great job, wow. And it was just the impact it would have. And so I took that a step further and I would go up to kids, say they made a mistake or something. I'd say, hey, Luke, wow, great job. You're working hard. I know you don't want to make a mistake. None of us do. Let me ask you a question. So I would use the WOW acronym. First W, I would say, what, were you thinking on that play? Right? What were you thinking and why did that happen? So why did you miss the ground ball? Why did you miss the pass? What happened? And they might in hockey say, you know what? I thought Ethan was coming down the back door. So I threw the pass there. I didn't realize he was going to come up for a top cycle. Okay, awesome. So we've recognized it. I would have said the same thing, but we're letting them recognize it. So then the O is what's another option? What other option could you have done? I could have held on to the puck for 2 seconds to see if Ethan was going to go to that space or if I should have curled up high. Awesome. Now the other W is what are you going to do next? So next time, what are you going to do in that situation? I'm going to have more patience and presence. I just asked them the question. They answered it how I would have. And if they missed something, I can ask a follow-up question or I can say, hey, you know what, Luke, wow, awesome job. Keep working hard. Just remember the patience and presence when you're passing the puck as well. Make sure you keep your head up. So I've just built them up. I've actually coached them and poured into them. And if they can relate to that, that's going to give them way more confidence and success. And yes, there are times where, I might have to dig a little deeper if they keep doing the same thing over and over and expect a different result, which is the definition of insanity. And some players don't get it, and you do have to take a little more proactive approach. But what I found is if you start that way with players, you're going to get buy-in, you're going to get them playing at a much higher level because every kid, no matter what level, they don't want to screw up. They're not going out there saying, hey, I want to have a turnover. I want to miss the ground ball. I want to strike out. So how can we help them realize, the wow factor? That's what I started to use probably over the last 7 or 8 years.
In your book, you talk about leadership, which goes to what you were just saying. And there's three different types of leaders, transformational, transactional, and servant leaders that you have in your book. What do you think is the most effective leaders of those three that you talked about in your book? And I was very surprised in the book that only 10% of the population are actually born leaders, and 20% have the potential to be a leader, but 85% are followers. So I thought that was a very interesting statistic in the book, and I thought that was really, really good. But talk about the three different types of leaders. Which do you feel is the best for business? Which do you feel is the best for sports? What do you think is the best for coaching?
Yeah, I think, and I'll kind of work it backwards. So the reason I have that quote or that statistic in there, biggest thing is because I'm not a huge believer that we are natural born leaders, right? But I think the statistics, consistently push it down people's throat, like, hey, only certain percentage are leaders, a certain percentage were born with something, and the rest of you, good luck, right? I think what it is, again, it comes down to social media. And if you think about when you like something, you're told and asked to follow. So society is building followers, but we don't have the right leaders. So to flip that script, who are you following to lead, right? And for me, and I've talked about it as a believer in Jesus Christ, we did not have enough Christ followers, but we have followers of other things. So if you can be that positive role model, to your point of the three different types of leaders, honestly, I think it depends more on who you're leading. So when I work with clients in all those spaces that you just talked about, whether it's coaching, athletics, executive teams, sales organizations, any aspect of life in general, my job is to assess them first. So I can assess, like I'm working with a Division 1 gymnastics team this year. And when we go into it, I'll assess every girl through the program. So I have an assessment that I use, and I can look at it and say, okay, how do they view themselves? How do they feel the world or their coaches view them and their teammates? And what's that combined view? And the reason for that, then I can help either the coach or the teammates figure out how to interact with each other because we're all programmed different. So some might react better to a transformational leader or a servant leader, right? And it depends on that individual person. And the reason I learned that is from hockey, skating 101. They always tell you to get low, deep knee bend, long strides. That's my skating stride. But if I teach that to my son who's in 7th grade and plays hockey, he's more of a long profile. He's less low, he's less long. And if I teach him to skate, he's probably going to become a worse hockey player, right? So it's the same thing in leadership. We have to identify that. Whereas I think in the past, everyone says, hey, here's how you take a ground ball. Here's how you hit. Here's where you place your hands. That's not true for everyone. You watch some of the greatest hitters, they don't all hit the same. It's how their profile is. So mentally, it's the same thing when we lead players, we lead teams, organizations. You have to know how they're wired. And I'll leave you with this. When I coached my last years of high school hockey, I would strictly do an assessment. I would use that assessment only on the bench to coach those players. So I knew how they were all wired and I would coach them individually. I'd let my other two coaches, coach systems. I'd step in at certain times, but I would be able to motivate the kids. I'd be able to teach them. And when I got out of that aspect and started to just coach strictly on emotion and how I wanted to be coached, that's when we would not have success. So leaders have to know who they're leading in order to decide which area is best for them.
In professional hockey in the NHL, how much coaching does the coach do? Or at this point, he realizes these guys are, they're the best of the best. How much can I really teach them?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing that it needs to switch to is what I just talked about. That's where they're going to have way more success because, to your point, these players, I mean, you watch any sport, I mean, especially in hockey, the skill level, it's at a whole different area than we've ever been at. You go and watch a professional hockey game, it's more like a chess game. And if you think of it, that's what the coach's job is to dissect the video to say, hey, if I'm playing against Luke, Ethan, Giannis, whoever it is, like what's their tendency? And then we can expose that because most of those players, we're assessing the other team now. Where's their strength? They're going to their right, to their left, are they on their forehand? And sometimes you can't even stop it. You look at Ovechkin breaking the record. I guarantee he scored a majority of his goals in two spots. And you could sit next to him the whole game and somehow he's still going to score one or two goals. But you give that information to the player. And that's where I think it shifted before, like when my dad played professional hockey, they went to training camp to get into shape and to get ready for the season. Whereas now these guys are ready to go. And now it's all about implementation and execution. And that's where the coaches come in. Any sport, you see they have iPads on the benches of football, hockey, and they're going through like real time coaching and teaching. Whereas before, it was probably more off of raw emotion and similar to what you talked about earlier, right? Yelling at the player. They still do that to a certain extent, but I think there's that coaching aspect has kind of shifted into a different area.
Yeah, more like the transactional leader that you talk about in your book, where they give negative reinforcement or positive reinforcement where they yell at the player. Something I wanted to ask you about, there are certain players, in practice, during the process, they're very average. But once the game is on, they become gamers. They're unbelievable players. And then you get the other kid who's great in practice, but once the lights go on, they struggle, which I find that's more typical. Talk to me about that type of player, those type of players, and how those could be changed.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you for a fact, I was the first one. I was a gamer, right? I mean, you talk to some of my coaches, I probably drove them crazy. But for me, it was the preparation. I had already done a lot of the work and I knew where I was. And as we went into game time, um, any coach, any ref that you talk to probably hated me because I was a game time player and I was competitive, right? On the flip side, you have the guys who are look great in practice or tryouts, but once that pressure comes in, they don't even know what to do. And I think it comes down to, and I talked about that in the book a little bit about when you're looking at like confidence versus humility, right? Complacency versus competitiveness, all these comparisons, perseverance and resiliency. And you look at it is how do you build that up? And the only way you can build that up is by building their confidence. But again, you have to, and a lot of people talk about it, you have to burn the boats, right? And a lot of those kids haven't done that, whereas they keep going back to, yes, I'm prepared, but then I fail. And I'm going to tell you the one biggest reason for it is because of parents, parent pressure, whether it's directly related to them or it's subconscious in the kid. Whereas they hear their parents, hey, we're spending a ton of money on Billy in hockey. Like they understand, like, oh my gosh, they're investing in me. They're spending a ton of money and time. Hey, we're not going on spring break this year because Billy's got a tournament. So now that kid feels that pressure subconsciously. And as they get older, they're basically pushed against a wall of, I have to succeed because my parents have invested in me. But to that point of practice versus gamer, a lot of kids cannot translate practice to game when all of a sudden you're getting yelled at. You look at the Masters recently with Rory. I mean, the guy had a roller coaster, right?
Hold that thought just for a second. We'll get back to that. This is Dr. Kerry Gill for Open Your Eyes Radio. I'm speaking with Eric Westrum, his new book, The 1% Impact.
MacuHealth, your science-born and tested solutions for visual performance, macular degeneration, and dry eye syndrome. New products coming soon. Embrace the science.
We're back with Eric Westrum, his book, 1% Impact. Before the break, we were speaking about the Masters. We were just watching the Masters and the pressure on Rory McIlroy, who was having a crazy up and down day. And here's a guy that is an amazing golfer, but you could see how he could feel the pressure. He felt the pressure in the U.S. Open, and he started to feel the pressure in the Masters. Talk about that type of player.
Yeah, and I think, and I don't know, his history, but you can see obviously through social media and replays and where he's folded or where he's had success. But again, if you go out on the golf course with professional golfers and there's nobody around, like they're all dialed in, right? I have a friend who played, amateur and unbelievable golfer. And then another buddy who's, like a club pro and just dialed in. And all of a sudden, if you put different people in different situations with screaming fans and something on the line, and again, it's the whole process. The process of the last 18 holes is you got to kind of compartmentalize hole by hole, and then the result is to win. And sometimes I think potentially in his situation or others, you're looking at that end game of the green jacket, you're looking at the end game of the gold medal, you're looking at the end game of a world championship or a Stanley Cup. And I think what happens is you start to get in your own way, and it happens with kids. It's the same thing. I don't want to say it's easy to get out of your own way, but it's easy once you have the tools. And as I was saying before, once you assess a player or an individual and you can kind of break it down, it's an aha moment for them to be able to have consistency. And you look at a lot of those players. I mean, you can go to other athletes, and I won't use names, but where they had success, they were confident, they had put in the practice, and then once a wrench gets thrown in, whether it was something from social media or whether it was a scandal or whatever else, all of a sudden the focus changes and they're not the same player that they ever were or ever could be. And kids in their brains and how they develop. In amateur athletes, college athletes, it's even harder to maintain that level. And I think that's why people ride that roller coaster. And sometimes when they hit the bottom, they're almost fatigued and they don't have what it takes to come back to the top.
I mean, somebody like Tiger Woods, when the pressure was on, he got better. What made him get better? What makes a Gretzky get better? What makes Derek Jeter get better? What is it within them that they're able to perform better when they're under this incredible pressure?
I think the biggest thing is honestly their preparation, right? So you look at, the names you just named, the Tiger Woods, the Jeter, the Gretzkys, the Jordans, the Bradys, the Kobes. They put so much work into it that they know that they're outworking somebody, right? A great conversation I had was with a friend he was going through retirement from the NHL. He's like, and he was one of the best players, right, in the world. And talking to him, it was why, as you go through retirement, why are you retiring? He said, because he's like, Westy, he goes, I just never know if I'm doing enough. And I looked at him and I'm like, you're one of the hardest workers. You're watching your nutrition, you're working out, but the elite players feel like they're never doing enough. The average players feel like they're doing more than everyone else. So if you let that sink in, that is the difference. The Kobe's, the Tigers, the Brady's, the Gretz, like they've put so much work in that they have so much confidence going into that game or that situation. Whereas the other person is almost like, oh crap, Tom Brady, he's probably put more work into me. I'm going to try to get out of this. Or a Tiger Woods, he's put so much into it and they freeze of like, did I put enough work into it subconsciously? Whereas the other player's like, hey, I got this. And they understand you're not going to be 100%. Michael Jordan talks about it all the time. What percentage of game winning shots did he miss? How much failure did he have in order to have success? And get back full circle to our conversation, instant gratification is what people see. They don't see the process. And the more time you put into that process, the more success you're going to have at the end of the day.
I find it interesting because there's different grades of it because these pros, they had to be the best in high school and the best in college to be able to make it to the pros. So you would think once they're in there, once they make it, like takes Rory, he had to win all these tournaments to become a professional golfer. So he's had all this pressure all along, but at the ultimate moment is where they have trouble, even people at that level.
Yeah, and I think what it is it's always the stakes always get higher and higher and higher, right? So when you look at it, and I'm fully transparent with my own journey, I mean, that's why I was Stanley Cup sitting behind me because I never won it because I kind of was in that space where it was like going from eighth grade, making the B team to winning the state championship to playing at the University of Minnesota to playing in the NHL to scoring a game-winning goal for US, all of this, and they kept going and going leading scorer, Switzerland, and it was like continuing to accomplish stuff. I got to a point where I almost came back to the US playing the NHL, and I was just like, I don't know if I can keep doing it. Right. And it was one of those like, for me, it was wear and tear and it was mentally, draining. And that's where I kind of unlocked the keys for other people now because I know I've been in both situations where it's, hey, here's where you are. And it's that difference between discipline and motivation, right? If you're motivated by the ultimate goal, it's good in a way, but you need the discipline to get there because motivation, you do it when you feel like it, and discipline is you do it when you don't.
You know, it, Speaking about the tremendous pressure on professional athletes, in your book, you talk about athletes when they retire, that over 50% of them become addicted to something, that over 70% of them go bankrupt. Depression is 40%, 60%, over 60 to 80% get divorced. What causes that after they're done with professional sports that they have these type of problems in their personal life?
I mean, there's numerous things, but when you look at it as an athlete, you're driven by either having your back against the wall or you're chasing, a dopamine hit. Basically, you're chasing success, you're chasing wins. And it's similar, people I've talked to in different, professions sometimes, but with athletes, especially, you've had this ultimate success. So you come back into, we call it like being a civilian or a normal person. You can't replicate that. You can't, you go into, like I was in sales and insurance and finance and own businesses. And it's like, hey, try to hit the $1 million round table or the chairman's circle or all these. Nobody, you can't replicate going in a shootout to win a bronze medal. You can't replicate, a Stanley Cup. You can't replicate a world championship, an NCAA championship, a state tournament. You can't replicate that. So what happens? It's the same thing where as athletes, when you're an athlete, you have so much pressure to play. And then unfortunately, a lot of players, go into a certain vice, whether that's alcohol, drugs, addiction, right? Whether it's womanizing in all these different categories. And then you're chasing something else and you're trying to chase and conquer and conquer and conquer. And then your reality versus perception, which I talk a little bit about in the book as well, is like, what's the reality versus the perception? The reality is you're not a professional athlete anymore. The reality is you have to figure out another purpose in your life and passion. And you have the perception that you're still who you were and you're still trying to chase something that's not even attainable. And I think that's what happens. So people come in and you're married and you can go on vacations and do all this great stuff and eat great dinners and you just basically live in a life of luxury and then you come back. It's similar to people when they retire. Their kids are empty nesters. Now it's you and your person, your family, spend more time together. You're spending more money. You're not making more money, right? You might be depressed because you're not getting that feedback from the fans and signing autographs all the time. You might take that, alcohol from socially to every single day, which can lead into other stuff. So I think that's the biggest part is there's such a mental makeup of chasing and chasing and chasing. And then you either just get depleted and you're done chasing and you don't feel worthy. You don't feel you have a purpose, or you're chasing stuff that is worldly and that's probably not healthy in that space too.
You brought up signing autographs. How do players feel about signing autographs? And as the more elite players, are bugged all the time about signing autographs. How do they feel about that?
Yeah, I think everyone's different. I mean, I when I was younger, going to Minnesota North Star games, we used to get autographs from people all the time downstairs by the tunnel, and I still have a remembrance of Eric Lindros, Philadelphia Flyers. He didn't sign our stuff, and I'm like, if I ever get into that position, I will sign every person's autograph. I'm like, where were you when you were a kid, and how did that make you feel? Right. So for me, I love it, do it all the time, whether it's now or obviously more in the past. I still get mail, like once, twice a week from people with cards, pictures. I'll sign them, send them off. I have people I know that get those type of mail and they don't send it back. And I'm like, it's weird to me that if somebody is right fulfilled in getting an autograph or they're trying to get everybody on a certain team on a jersey, or you're in that situation, a lot of us have been that kid or in that situation where they wanted someone's autograph, they wanted to meet someone. So I always look at it like, you're just another human being. And if you can fulfill that kid's dream of meeting, of signing an autograph and kind of going through that. So but then at other times too, there's a time and a place, right? Like when you see like golf again, right? As people are coming through to the next hole, like maybe someone signs a golf ball and they're like, well, why doesn't he wait and sign everybody's golf? It's, they're in a flow state too. So you have to respect that. Hockey, basketball is a little different because you're playing in the game and then afterwards. And then it's emotional too, right? Sometimes guys might be upset. And can you separate that right away? But I think the majority of people, that I've come across, especially hockey players, are usually really good about it. Other sports, as well. But once you kind of get in your own way or you have a bigger head, that's when you get in trouble for sure. But I think, yeah, people love signing autographs, because you're giving back and you're fulfilling somebody's dream.
I want to ask you, there was a quote in your book by Napoleon Hill, if you believe, you will achieve. So is believing enough, or is there other things that are involved in achieving?
No, I think that's a great question. It's funny. My dad was reading my book as it was published, and he sent that over to some of his friends. on different things, more so at his age in the political atmosphere of different stuff. We won't go there. But for me, I think the belief is where the seed's planted, right? Because if you don't believe, you won't achieve. But if you do believe, you will achieve. But again, you can't sit on the couch and eat potato chips and just expect something to happen. But I think it's the seed that is planted. And that's my hope when someone hears that quote. If you believe, you can achieve. When I work with athletes, my own kids and other people, I always say, here, you want me? I can guarantee you, you will play Division 1 in this sport, but guess why you won't? And they're like, wait a second, you just said you guaranteed, but why I won't? Because I guarantee, even if I told you that, in the next 7 years, you have to put this amount of work in every single day outside of what you do normally. You will skip a day, 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months. So now your percentage drastically drops because there's someone out there, and that's how I was after I made the B team in 8th grade, as I went into ninth, 10th grade and figured it out. That is the only reason I made it is A, I believed, and two, I put the work in. And we were unfortunately at a friend of mine a month ago. He died of a heart attack at 45, my college roommate. And as players, we were there and we were talking, and one of the guys made a comment of talking to, one of our old coaches about, hey, who was, one of the hardest players you coached or most competitive? He goes, that it's an easy answer. He's like Eric Westrum. He said, because he was the most competitive, but he was also one of the hardest to coach because whatever he believed, he thought he could achieve. He had like the most outlandish ideas of what he could achieve. And the craziest part is 95% of it he did. And I think that is the difference. And that is why I talk about that is you need to believe to achieve it, but you have to be competitive and you have to do whatever you can to get to that point. And it's not easy. Otherwise, everybody else would do it.
You talk about celebrating small wins. Tell me why that's important, and how do you do that with not being like overly conceited, but to make it where it's beneficial for you and also your teammates?
It's hard. I mean, I'm bad at that, right? I did not celebrate a ton of wins. A friend of mine, PJ Fleck, who coaches the University of Minnesota, actually brought that to me probably about 2.5 years ago. We were doing an event together, and he kind of called me out on that. Like, you're not celebrating the wins. Same thing. I publish a book, I move on to the next book, right? And it's stopping in that moment where, like, publishing a book's a big deal, and I look at it like no big deal. So it's the same thing with those small wins. The reason as you stack those wins and you celebrate, right, your mind is being trained and programmed to say, hey, this was a good thing. Let's keep doing more good stuff. And I think what happens is so many people don't celebrate the win. And I'm the number one person who's guilty. And what happens is you get numb to that success, and then you don't have the willingness to chase it or put the work in. So it's kind of twofold, right? You fall in love with the process, but if you don't celebrate that win and your mind's not feeling that success, what's going to push you to continue to do it? And that's what I've learned, and I'm still brutal at it. To be honest, I try hard to celebrate wins more and more. But I think when you don't, it's detrimental to your success because you become numb, and then it doesn't matter if you have success or failure because they're almost treated the same.
How do you celebrate wins?
So back in the day, we'd celebrate it probably the wrong way. Late nights and a lot of fun, right? Play hard, party hard. I think now it's more just acknowledging it by, talking to your family about, hey, I'm not saying this from an egotistical standpoint, but we do it with our kids and our family of, hey, what's a win you had today? What did you do? I passed the test. I worked hard. And it's not just the A plus, it's the preparation. And I try to celebrate those wins more of even like for me today, late night, last night for my kids' track meet, got home. Last thing I want to do is wake up and work out. But it's even telling myself, celebrating that win of running on the treadmill for 20 minutes, getting a little exercise in, weight training, cold plunge, and just saying, hey, you know what? You didn't want to do it, but look how you feel, right? And it's even sounds stupid to some people, but I think that just trains your brain and it gets you set up for success as you go into your next opportunity each day, each month, and each week.
I think in the book, one of the concepts I thought was very interesting was reality versus optimism. You want to be optimistic, but you have to have a dose of reality. Talk about being overly optimistic, under optimistic, and how you make it where you find the happy medium for reality.
Yeah, I think that's a great question too. Ironically, I was talking with my dad about that one as well. And it's if you look at the reality, I use reality and optimism and reality and perception kind of in the trainings I do, because if you're coaching me, you're going to have a different perception and reality than I am. So I have to take in some of that information that is the reality, but I also have to kind of 10x the optimism side. So if it's around playing a sport, right? Okay, reality is less than 1% of people make it to the NHL. If that's what I'm going to go off of, I might as well not even play hockey, right? And then that's detrimental. Whereas the optimism side is flip it, 1% arrive and get to play in the NHL. Oh, I can be in that 1%. How can I get there? But if you've never played hockey or you've never worked out or you never put the work in, you got to go into the reality mode of like, what's the reality of what I need to do? And you can't just say, I'm going to make it. And I think that's where, a lot of the players I trained, are on either one of the spectrums, and it's trying to bring them into the middle to have that reality, but then also being optimistic. And there's a fine line between the two, because then that gets into everything else we talked about, right? Confidence versus, humility, talking about perseverance, grit, consistency, discipline. But at the end of the day, if you're optimistic and you don't believe that you can achieve it, then you're not gonna.
And talk to me about time management versus priority management. You talk a lot about that in the book. Time management is so important because, if you're talking about a business person, they have a family, they have to spend time with their family, but they have to achieve certain goals. You're talking about a kid, they have homework. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think that's great. I was actually just doing that on the plane ride home from a speaking engagement. I was writing down like 2 hour blocks of where I want to spend my time. And then I was also looking at what's my priority, right? Whether that's in business, whether it's the revenue generators, whether that's in family time. And I think for me, priorities is you have to align it with your core values. So if my core values are faith, family, fitness, whatever it goes in that order, then I have to look at my calendar and say, where am I spending my time? And then I have to look at my quote unquote checkbook or online bank account of where am I spending my money. So where does my money come in and where does it go out? Where does my time come in and where does it go out? Where does my energy from those come in and where does my energy drain? And then that's where your priority management comes in versus time. So some people spend time, they're like, oh, I need to prioritize work or this or that. But is it really a priority? Does it drive the needle to your happiness? Does it drive the needle to your revenue? Does it drive the needle to your connection with your kids? And ironically, I'm pivoting into fatherhood. I'll actually have a third and a fourth book out here in the next month and a half. One's a kid's book that I wrote with my 4 year old. And then
Okay.
another one is around fatherhood by design. And it's exactly that. It's managing your priorities, and your family should be your number one priority. But people are so busy in life that they go to the time management side instead of the priority management.
We only have about a minute and a half left. I want to ask you this question. Kids have multiple coaches because of the way things are. They have their high school coach, their junior high school coach, they have their private coaches. And then you have coaches, different seasons. How's a kid handle it? They have one coach telling him to do one thing, and then they have another coach telling him to do the exact opposite thing, and they're both yelling at the kid. In a minute left, how do you deal with that?
I mean, I'm coaching girls basketball now and hockey and football and all this, and I hear the parents on one side, I hear different coaches on one side. I think the biggest thing that kids can do is just realize like where they are, and it's hard at a younger age, but it's again taking in the information and then trying to process it to figure out what can help them be the most successful. And it's not selfish. It's being successful as an individual is going to help your team. So it's hard, but trying to process it, and then the keyword's boundaries, right? And I think a lot of times we do not set boundaries for ourselves. Therefore, how can our kids learn how to set boundaries?
So we're speaking with Eric Westrum. Eric, if people want to get in touch with you, how can they do that? How can they buy your book?
Yeah, two things. EricWestrumBook.com, ErikWestrum book.com, or my email is eric@ericwestrum.com. I'm happy to connect with people, give them free resources, direction to be elite and level up 1% at a time.
Eric, thank you for joining me today on Open Your Eyes Radio and podcast with Dr. Kerry Gelb. Thank you.
Your eyes and your vision are under attack. Damaging blue light from the sun, your phone, your computer, your tablet, even light bulbs and car headlights is constantly bombarding you. The good news is our eyes actually already have a line of defense to counter the effects of blue light. This defense is made up of 3 pigments called carotenoids. MacuHealth with Micromicelle, the only supplement with the exclusive patent on all 3 macular carotenoids and Micromicelle technology.
Fitting multifocal contact lenses presents a big opportunity to meet patient needs while growing your practice. Alcon is your partner not only with our innovative portfolio, but through e-learning. Learn to enhance your multifocal strategy today with the Alcon Experience Academy.